Right. Greetings, everyone. My name is Aaryan Salman, and I'm honored to engage Dr. Nicholas Jackson and Matthew Esterman in this fireside chat as part of the 28th edition of the Educational Leadership Forum. We're very grateful to have had the privilege of welcoming you as well as our distinguished guests, Dr. Nicholas Jackson and Matthew Esterman, authors of The Next Word, AI and Teachers. Well, The Next Word, AI and Teachers is a very practical handbook that provides clear and incisive insights for educators on integrating AI into their classrooms, teaching practice, and leadership. Once again, thank you all for investing your time with us today. We truly value your presence and participation in this exciting fireside chat exchange. Now, please allow me to formally introduce Dr. Nicholas Jackson. Um, Nick has dedicated over 25 years to the field of education, shaping the way technology intersects with teaching and learning. His work spans multiple continents, having engaged directly with educators and students in the UK, US, India, and Australia, as well as globally through online platforms. He currently serves as the leader of digital technologies at Scotch College and is the founder of New Future Learning, where he explores the evolving relationship between education and emerging technologies. We also have with us the co author of The Next Word, Matthew Esterman. Matt has spent over 15 years working in schools and beyond as an advocate for thoughtful adoption of technology. His impact extends across classrooms, universities, and organizations, where he has been instrumental in increasing AI awareness and capabilities amongst educators and educational institutions. He has been recognized with several awards, most recently as a Commonwealth Bank Teaching Fellow by Australian Schools Plus. So today, as we engage in this panel discussion, I would like to briefly take you through what we discussed in the previous, in the previous panel. So we did recognize that AI is not just a tool for efficiency, but also a potential enabler for deeper human connection, collaboration, and inclusive learning and learning spaces. Today, we are excited to push this conversation further as we welcome our celebrated guests who will help us gain a more nuanced perspective on this essential domain. So let us all welcome Dr. Nicholas Jackson and Matthew Esterman. Welcome, both of you. All right. So first question to both of you. What exactly inspired you to write the book, The Next Word? And what is the key message you hope educators can take away from it?
Matt, do you want to go?
Sure. Well, my story is that Nick and I have known each other for a very long time, and we were both in similar roles when ChatGPT came onto the scene. And after that point, we started having very regular chats about what was going on in our schools and that we were seeing through social media. And we got to the point of saying, after many conversations, look, maybe we should write a book about this. And I can't remember which one of us said that. I blame Nick, and I think he blames me. And what ended up happening, I think, was just a wonderful process of trying to distill some of our thinking, trying to keep it practical, as well as really tying it back to what we know works for teachers on the ground, but also some learning theory and some deeper understanding about teaching and learning.
Yeah, I mean, very much as Matt's talking about there, a very organic process, an extension of what we were already doing and what we were already talking about. I would say the only other elements that we brought to actually publishing this in a book, other than going through the publishing process, which was an eye-opener in itself, of how smooth and how easy that can be if you get the right people on board. And we only have experience of the people we work with, and we can say that's been a pleasant experience all the way through. But I suppose the biggest extension to what we were already talking about was the fact that we started to conduct these interviews with teachers all around the world, many of them sort of like what we're doing now, online, like this kind of thing. And some of those were people we knew, and some of those were not. And it was the idea of trying to gather perspectives of what was happening in their schools, in their communities, in their countries, and trying to understand if what we were seeing in our different parts of Australia and from our networks that we knew was actually an accurate representation of what was going on in other parts of the world. Now, I don't think for a minute we've captured everywhere. I've no doubt there's some people on in this particular session now who have different experiences and different perspectives. I would say that it's probably, there's no doubt at all that it's biased towards more Western countries or first world countries, I would say. So there may be different representations in other countries, but we did try to gather some of those perspectives and trying to get those nuances of what was happening in different parts of the world and try and bring that to the table to understand more about what we were seeing, and also try to get some of that higher ed and some of that junior school thinking as well.
Thank you so much for sharing, both of you. Now, you interviewed teachers from around the world. So this question is around what's not included in the book, right? So I'm sure like you've had very rich experience of interviewing folks and getting those insights. So in your opinion, what didn't make it into the book but was interesting, or maybe like, something that didn't make through the final cut, but nonetheless, like, interesting. So if you have anything of those sorts, it could be very interesting to know.
I don't think we really cut much out that I can remember. There was bits where we started to feel like we were repeating ourselves in terms of message. I can remember that. I think it was more, Aaryan, that we had to stop somewhere. We had to stop and publish. It was simple because we could have gone on forever, and in this space, because it's so fertile and such rapid development, there has got to come a point where you've got, okay, that's it. We're just going to publish now, because what are you going to be talking about tomorrow? What are you going to be talking about the day after, or in a week or in a month? And I think that's an important message, whether you're writing a book or whatever you're doing in this space, is that you can't know everything and you can't cover everything and you can't cover every angle. And you also can't please everybody who has an opinion in this space. You also can't answer most of the questions either. You can just offer different views and different perspectives. So it was more that case of going, I know this sounds kind of a bit crude, but it's good enough. Let's just put it out there, because the book is meant to provoke thought. It's meant to establish views and sort of thinking around this area, but also offer the practicalities of what we've done or what we know can be done or what other people have done. So the curation of ideas, the creation of ways to work with this technology. So it was about a time and a space for the book, but the book clearly has longevity. We believe it does, and we still believe that people will find it useful in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, regardless of where AI goes, because it has those roots that are philosophical. It has those roots about human beings. So I would say that there was very little that fell on the cutting room floor. It was more us knowing that we had to stop and just publish.
Yeah, I think I'd just add to that one additional aspect, which I think is the nature of our writing and the nature of the book as well, because we did get to a point where we'd written it with quite an academic voice at some point, and it was us and our publishers who kind of really our publisher who kind of said, this isn't an academic paper. It's not going into an academic book published by a higher education institution kind of a thing. You can speak, in an everyday way, and that's totally fine. Your audience is teachers who are in schools right now. It's school leaders. It's people who need this advice right away. So don't worry about that. So I think we did actually cut out that
Yes, that's true.
Aspect or that lens to it, I guess, and that freed us up as well to be more conversational, to be more relational, I think, rather than worrying about what kind of footnotes we were doing or what kind of referencing we were doing. It's just say, actually, we don't need to reference like we would in academic text.
So I think from that, Aaryan, like what kind of message does that give you? What me and Matt are saying there is that, regardless of how much AI becomes a dominant force within education, whatever inroads it takes, there are always going to be things that humans do right or wrong, and processes they go through, and blind alleys and things that they think are right things to do, and curiosity and all those kinds of things. And some things are an organic process, and creativity in that respect, and bringing things together is, what we're talking about there. And we didn't talk about AI at all, or technology. We talked about what we thought was right and what we believed we were passionate about. So, and technology just played a part in that, including AI. So, I think that's an important message going forward, that this is a book about AI. It's a book that involved AI in the writing process or authoring process, but it was our book, it's our words, it's our thoughts, it's the work we did. So, what does that tell you about AI and education, and AI and teaching and learning, and AI and living, really?
Thank you so much, Nick and Matt. So my next question to you, I think it's also connected to teachers and students and how they interact with, say, learning. So in this context, like say, for example, a lot of teachers use technology at this point in time. But formally, like, bringing into school ecosystems, what do you think are some of the risks or unintended consequences that you think uh, teachers should be aware of while integrating AI within their classrooms or within their school ecosystems? So what are some of these, what do you call, pitfalls that they should be aware of before getting into it heads on?
I'll have a go first. I think there are many, and I think some of them are similar to previous technologies. I think some of them are similar to other influences in the classroom. So, so that evaluation process of resources. So every time you have a choice about what to bring into the classroom, it could be a type of activity, it could be a type of written resource, it could be a particular, I don't know, a poem, or a film or something like that, right? And you've got a professional choice to make. You make decisions based on your values and based on the relevance and the context and the accuracy of the resources you're looking at. I think the trickier part with AI is that it's in students' hands already. So you're less of a gatekeeper. I think this is something we emphasized quite a lot in the book, is that shifting role of the teacher, is to say that you've still got to make that evaluation as things are coming into the classroom, or even in your own practice as well. And I think those are two distinct use cases, is whether teachers are using these tools for themselves and their own work, and whether they're using them in the classroom with students, or in those sorts of student-facing contexts. But yeah, when teachers are making that decision, they have to realize that they're not really the gatekeeper anymore to that technology. If students have access to a smartphone, an internet-connected device, then they have access to these tools, which wasn't true with previous generations of technologies. So, the school probably owned a set of calculators. The school probably owned a TV. The school probably owned those sorts of technologies, and students had to wait till they got to school. Teachers had to wait till they get to work. Well, people generally in society had to wait, and they could be a bit of a gatekeeper. Whereas one of the risks, I guess, is not only that teachers bring in technologies that aren't appropriate because of age, because of content, because of they haven't considered some of the basic risks that are to do with this kind of technology, but actually one of the risks is not engaging with it, because students already are, whether we like them to or not. One of the biggest risks I've seen in schools is where schools or teachers say nothing. They don't say no, they don't say yes, they just say nothing about AI. And your students who are using it already are going out there into the dark forest with no guidance whatsoever. And so one of the things we've tried to set in the book, and I certainly try and say in my work, is at least take a stance. I almost don't care what that stance is. I much prefer you taking a stance and starting and leading a conversation than having nothing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah,
Yes,
just adding on to that is that because of the pervasive nature of this technology and the rapid growth of this technology, it is that thing of going, there are these people here that are doing nothing. There are these people that are just beginning their journey. There's these people, a whole glut in the middle, and then there's people who are doing things just for themselves and then not openly declaring anything about that. And then there's these small collection of people who are active in this space and trying to hang on to the coattails of the rapid development of this technology. So what you have is this huge differentiation piece. So that's unlike other technology in the speed at which that happens. because Matt and I lived through this whole Web 2 scenario that happened in education. We lived through that. We lived and breathed that. But that went at a much slower pace than this. It had some of the same feelings, but much, much slower. And what it didn't have, what Matt's talking about there, is it didn't have mobile. It didn't have mobile driving it. It didn't have mobile that everybody has. You know, we have mobile phones being bought for year 3 and year 4 students now. Smartphones. That's the reality that's going on in some cases. I just did a session the other day where I was talking to ELC parents, and their main fear is social media. They've got 3 and 4-year-olds, but they're worried about social media already. So the cultures that exist at the moment and the way we are operating as a society means that technology like this, that is all-encompassing, rapid growth, you know, all those kinds of things, spreads like wildfire in so many different ways. And trying to get a grasp of that and the feelings that that brings for teachers, yeah, is a complex area like we've never seen before.
Thank you, Nick. So building on to the question that, building on to the idea that you shared around hesitation or secrecy around acknowledging, say, AI usage, I think you've also mentioned this in the book. So I was wondering, like, you know, if this is similar to not acknowledging spell checkers or grammar correcting tools, is that the kind of attitude we have? That's one part of my question, but the second more important part of my question is, what do you think are prerequisites for us to create this culture where disclosure of AI or AI usage is not considered a taboo? So what do you think are the prerequisites? What should school leaders, what should governments or even departments create before, like, you know, we expect people to come out in the open and talk about these things? So yes, Matt and Nick, either of you
Yeah,
can
look, I think there's a few layers to it. So there's our expectations on a day-to-day basis with students in terms of acknowledging their work and acknowledging sources of information that isn't theirs. I think one of the practical ways I explain it to students and to teachers is to say, do you really care how students cheat? You know, like if they're presenting work that's not theirs, do you care more that it's done by AI as opposed to a parent who's helped out, or a tutor who's helped out, or an older sibling or a friend who's given them their notes? And, you know, do you really have those on different levels, or is the point that they have presented work that's not theirs? And I think that's the main point, is that. And so we haven't really cared about spell checkers. We haven't really cared about grammar checkers. We haven't cared about tutors and parents and friends having an influence over students' work. But AI's come along and we've suddenly had an explosion of caring about plagiarism and cheating. And I think that therefore, on that day-to-day level, we have to be really clear about what we actually mean by cheating now. And I don't think lots of places have had that conversation. I think a lot of people think they know, but that might be different to what the next teacher in the next classroom thinks, what their school leader thinks. And so I think connecting that to the school leadership level, then I think that's the role of school leaders, and sure, governments and curriculum authorities and others, to actually come up with a clear position on what cheating is, what plagiarism is, what it looks like, having illustrations of practice and examples of good practice and not great practice, so that students have better information. There was a recent survey in the UK where they surveyed 3,000 university students, and only 5% of them said that they were confident that they knew and could abide by the university's expectations. Only 5%. So 95% are either confused or lost. And that's just one survey, of course, but I'm anecdotally, I think that's absolutely true across schools for staff and students. So there needs to be better information provided to students, better information provided to schools, so that everyone's sort of aligned on what they actually mean by cheating and plagiarism. Because, yeah, students are worried about doing things that might be breaking rules when they're really trying not to. Of course, there are students who are going to cheat. That's been the case forever. And this is just the newest way that you can do it. But when they're not given clear information, it's a bit hard to ask students to live up to expectations they're not aware of. Yeah, Nick?
Yeah, I think as well, not just the plagiarism angle. I can't really extend on what Matt's saying there, apart from to agree with everything, because it's one of the most bizarre things is this big, huge focus on plagiarism. But I think that's actually part of a reductionist sort of approach to this technology. Is when something is so disruptive and so pervasive in different areas and so unfathomable in where it's going and how it's actually affecting us and so complex in those different ways. I think it's human nature to actually try and simplify things and to try and bring in some sort of control into areas where we think we can have control. So I think that reaction is plagiarism. That reaction is, let's ban this thing. That reaction is, oh, we're just going to ignore it, which is what Matt talked about before. If we ignore it, it doesn't exist. It doesn't matter anymore. And then there's the calculator argument, isn't it? This is just spell check. This is just calculator. This is just fill in the gap. I mean, we know how this technology works when you get down to it. But if you're going to reduce it just to it being, it guesses the next word and that's all it does. Really? Well, I'm sorry that is not what I experience, and it's not what I see my students experience. And it's not when you go out and do PD with people, it's not what people experience, because you can still get wow moments on every single doorstep you go to. So if that's the case, if it was just reducing it back to how the technology works, then we wouldn't be talking about AGI, would we? We wouldn't be talking about where this is going. We wouldn't be talking about what this means for society and what we have to learn and what we don't have to learn. So although that reaction is natural to understand that, and then we're not even covering what the media says, we have to like somehow push that to one side and go, okay, we understand all that, but there is far more to this, and there are far more nuances to this, and there's far more to understand at so many different levels.
And I think too, one of the massive challenges for schools, which will, systems will go for self-preservation, right? The systems that exist will try and survive no matter what. And that's why you have this reaction to the change that comes through. But the difference is that because it is in students' hands, students have this AI capability, they see what it can do, then they look at what's happening in schools and universities and in the workplace. And they're going, so why do we keep doing it that way? Like, if this tool can do this now, why am I learning this? And it's different to the old why am I learning this argument, because we used to be able to say, well, you'll need this for your final exams. Well, why do I need that? Well, because you're going to go to university or something, and so they need you to do that as well. Why do I need to do that? Well, because the workplace needs you to do those certain things and know that certain stuff. Unfortunately, AI comes along and questions every single part of that. Industry are struggling with this. Higher education is struggling with this. Schools are struggling with this because we're built to do something different. And the trouble is that schools are artificial intelligence systems. Universities are artificial intelligence systems. We have built these things, and they are rule-based, and they are, yes, they're culturally based and values-based, but they're based on rules and people following those rules. And guess what? AI is really good at following your rules and doing it very, very quickly and giving you outputs that mimic what humans can do. And that disruption hasn't really been dealt with, and we're still living through this revolution. So it's really hard. Just today, I was at a school who are really, walking forwards in this particular space. But I could see on their faces this sort of exasperation to say, in a couple of cases, of a couple of people just going, but this is the world we live in, and you're telling me it's not working anymore. Like, how do we even do this? And I didn't have an answer for them because we just don't know yet. All we can do is say, let's carry on, let's address it, let's try and respond rather than react, and see what's possible, see what it can help us create. But yeah, the reality is that it's really shaking all the fundamental assumptions of these different levels. And so we don't have the same promise to deliver to students as previous generations did.
Thank you, Matt. I think in the book you spoke about agentic future for students. So I was able to think about this as you were talking about that. So what does this really mean, and to what extent and in what critical ways do you think this will shift the status quo, if it would?
Well, I think we're starting to actually see that now, which is probably quicker than we actually anticipated. We're actually starting to realize some of those particular agents and what they can do. So we've seen examples already of agents being set to work on online courses like a Udemy course or a Coursera course and doing the whole of the assignments, logging on, doing the whole of the assignments, getting the certificate. So if it can do that, then effectively it can do an undergraduate course, it can do any online course. Many schools have LMSs, so it could be set to work on them. It starts to disrupt homework. It starts to disrupt anything that's in digital content, which most or a lot of learning is. So when you start to look at those things just on that level, you've got to start thinking, well, what as Matt talked about there is what you believed was the way we did things may not work anymore. It may not work on all sorts of different levels. And we're only talking about teaching and learning here. There are so many levels within schools that operate that agents could be deployed in. But really, the biggest concern is in teaching and learning because we don't know how to handle that. So agents bring a whole different level of how much you are giving away as a learner. If you're talking about teaching and learning and you're talking about you're worried about what students should learn or how they should learn and what is plagiarism and what is giving too much away and what is them not thinking, well, agents puts that on steroids, doesn't it? Potentially. So now we've got a different level to go to very quickly with AI. And when we were looking at an agentic future in the book, we didn't really offer solutions. We just said this is coming and it's going to look like this, and this is a different level. So we need to start thinking ahead, even though we're struggling with now. We need to start thinking about what is just around the corner, because the majority of teachers will not even be thinking about agents right now, or even aware that these things are happening as we speak and are available now. So, an agentic going forward, is it going to be that all these low level things that students can quickly do, have we got to then question, well, why are we bothering doing that at all? Or maybe we have to teach them how to work with agents to do those things because that's an important skill in itself. I just don't know. Or maybe we do that for a while and then we realize, you know what, we don't have to bother with that because they're all pretty adept at doing that. These are tough questions to answer, but it is going to look very different when every student effectively has their own co-pilot, their own agent, their own assistant that does these things for them. And what are these things? And do we have control of these things? Does the young person have control of these things? Is it just a Socratic view that this agent has, or is it something that actually answers all their questions for them and does everything for them? Almost like a Premier League footballer. They never have to change their own light bulb. Is that the way it's going to be? I don't know.
And in the book, we also use the word differently as well, right? Like we talked about an agentic future for students as in student agency and leadership of themselves and being more in control and managing their own future and their own learning as well. So funnily enough, as you know, as we're writing the book, this other aspect of agents, as in AI agents, came along. And I don't know, I certainly didn't have in mind that when we were talking about student agency. But now that is the reality, is that we were talking about how AI disrupts the roles of teachers and students, where, for a long, long time, lots of people have been talking about teachers needing to shift away from being a deliverer of content to a facilitator, to a connector, to a support, to a coach who knows the students quite well. But the more and more you look at AI as well, the AI is starting to learn about our students as well and being able to purport or mimic those sorts of actions, those sorts of advice, that sort of coaching that a teacher also is supposed to be able to do. And those are very human things that AI is now doing. And there's studies, for example, of doctors. So medical profession is often held up as sort of what education should be aiming for, right, in terms of our research standard and evidence-based practice and that sort of thing. And now you've got studies coming out saying not only is AI, and I mean ChatGPT, better at diagnosis than doctors in study after study after study, as in that is just done now. The experts are saying that basically AI is already there. So AI can, on average, do better diagnosis, like outstripping doctors for sure, and specialists, not just general practitioners. But people prefer to talk to AI chatbots, AI doctors, in terms of empathy. They feel more supported in a human sense by those. So what if that then applies to education? If we're applying all these other medical, health research and evidence standards into education, why not this one? To say, okay, well, what if students start to prefer an AI teacher? Both in terms of the ability to teach them the sort of structures of thinking and all that sort of stuff, but also in terms of well-being support. What if chatting with a chatbot actually has better well-being outcomes than what a human teacher can? I mean, that, and so the student has agency to choose whether they're listening to that particular teacher, the human one or the AI one, just like right now they're choosing to either listen to their parents or listen to TikTok in terms of life advice. And I'm not being facetious, that's literally what students are doing right now. So we've already got this sort of ocean of opportunities for students. And I think teachers do have a wonderful responsibility, a heavy responsibility to help guide students through that world. But it's going to be less and less about that content delivery. There, of course, will still be moments where a teacher needs to talk with young people and guide them through a particular moment of learning. But really, those scenarios are becoming less and less critical if students have access to the technology, which of course not all students do, and if they have access to great advice around it.
Thank you, Matt. So earlier you mentioned like teachers are not gatekeepers of this technology, AI. So in your view, how do you think AI is or will reshape the way teachers and students interact in learning and learning environments?
Well, as Matt just talked about there's no doubt at all that any teacher that still thinks they are the keepers of knowledge, they are somehow the subject expert when you're working with AI is highly unlikely. What you have is you may have the lived expertise, the lived experience, the lived some of those knowledges of those nuances around content that's there, but you're not there to deliver content regardless of how specialist and how many years you've been doing this. What you might be looking at is where you can guide students in their thinking or guide students through processes that allows them to develop their thinking, that allows them to curate from different sources to look at the parallels that they can make. But that doesn't mean that you are totally removing AI or the use of AI tools within that process. You should be bringing those AI tools in because they're actually very, very useful at giving different perspectives because you can give them roles and they also tend to hallucinate and they also have bias. And that bias actually plays into very much a brilliant teaching tool because you can allow students to analyze that. And the more you're doing that, this idea of the whole critical thinking students, that's under threat. Well, it's actually not if you involve a lot of AI within your work as a teacher. And that right now is what teachers should be doing. So it goes back to Matt's point. The worst thing you can be doing right now is ignoring this thing and saying it doesn't exist. And I actually think it's dangerous if you are not including it at all, even though, yes, I appreciate it's better that a teacher has a stance and says, I'm not having any bar of this AI type of thing in my classroom. But I would argue that they're doing their students a disservice because the more you use this tool, you've got rapid perspectives, you've got rapid exposure to bias. You've got a tool that can be used in many, many different ways. And I'm not just talking about chatbots, I'm talking about all sorts of different AI tools that you can put in students' hands. You can have the teacher working with the student. You can be co-developing together. You can establish relationships through the technology. And those things come back to empowering students. They come back to working with this technology without having to teach this technology, which is a question mark in itself. This thing about AI literacy and what exactly is that? Well, to me, I'm not really concerned whether a student can define what an LLM is. I'm more concerned that a student feels comfortable and skilled to be using this technology, but also knows when to stop or where their own voice is coming in and feels confident to be able to make those decisions because, and I'm sure we'll come on to that, they're different in different contexts, but that comes through use, that comes through exposure, that comes through experience. So the changing role of the teacher right now, and I think we can only talk about right now with any confidence, is to go, you've got to be bringing this technology in as much as possible and coaching young people at every opportunity through this technology into the world of now. Not preparing them for the future, you're preparing them for right now. You're preparing them to understand those platforms that they're working on socially are also working in similar ways as well. And they're also bringing in bias, and they're also like, I've got algorithms that are directing content and all these same things that are happening. So by bringing these tools in, you allow these extra conversations to happen, and you allow that bigger social model. So if we peel that back, what you're actually doing as a teacher increasingly, which has been happening for a long time, but even more so, is you're becoming a life coach, a well-being coach, a mentor, all of those things. One of my biggest bugbears is that well-being in education gets talked about as if it's something that's not to do with learning. Oh, now we're doing well-being. We're in well-being now, and now we're doing learning. What? Are the two things separate? Do you just leave it at the door and then you come and do learning? That never happens. So we bring all those things together. So by teaching in that kind of way, the stand at the front, deliver the content sort of model gets pushed further and further out. And now and again, you may do that. But if you bring these tools more into it and you bring this technology more into it, then students are in control of their getting the content when they want it, how they want it, and you are there threading through the nuances of their well-being and their understandings and their viewpoints and pointing out certain things that are happening as regards content and as regards technology as well.
Thank you, Nick. I think in the book you've spoken of a very interesting dynamic between, say, educators, AI, and researchers. So how does this dynamic look like? That's the first part of my question. And second, how can educators leverage from this dynamic in our times? So either of you can go ahead.
Look, I might jump in and just say that, you know, the AI platforms and versions of different platforms that are coming out now are just so good at providing research, conducting research that is equivalent to what humans could do, but doing it very, very rapidly, being able to provide different perspectives, being able to draw on multiple sources. It's really going to be an interesting future for research as well, because you know, Nick's completed his PhD, and the reality is that there are some of these powerful tools that can complete quite in-depth research, especially if it's all going to be documentary research and data analysis and interpretation of that data and drawing conclusions. And in the most cases, like from a consumer point of view, let's go back to medical research or the health area again. Who wouldn't want health research done faster, more effectively? You know, who doesn't want some treatments developed much more rapidly than we ever have, or conditions being addressed much more rapidly and cheaply than ever before, you know, and globally at global scale as well. So, but when we go to education, we're like, okay, well, it's almost like we don't want to solve some problems because we're not ready for it, you know, but the reality is that the disengagement of young people, and there's plenty of studies to back up what I'm about to say, but the disengagement of young people in school has never been higher. So, you know, and it does connect to the onset of the internet. It does connect to the onset of mobile devices. It does connect to the onset of social media. But those things are avatars for what was already going on. So what was already going on was more and more students were questioning the purpose of school, questioning the purpose of university. And we were doing everything we can to keep them in the classroom and keep them, you know, like in New South Wales, for example, when I went through school, it wasn't compulsory for students to complete school when they were 18. And still there are some options out of it. But generally speaking, most students are required to finish school when they're 18 because there is research, global research, to say that if you do that, people have better life outcomes. But of course, you have students sitting in class saying, I wish I was not here. I wish I was working. I wish I was doing something else. And I think that will become much more prevalent, much more visible, much more obvious when students much younger than just that sort of 18, you know, reaching adulthood kind of area, will just say, why am I here? And more students will probably sit quietly in class, not doing anything, just doing the bare minimum. And then they'll step outside of school world and be running their own business and doing some PhD level research and curing disease and doing all sorts of different things in all sorts of different social networks, for better or worse, because they have access to these technologies, and these technologies will be available on their smartphone. And so I think, you know, when we're seeing when you've got that sort of disengagement issue already, and then AI comes along to say, well, AI can act as your coach, it can act as your assistant, it can act as your chief of staff, it can act as your provocateur, it can act as your research assistant, it can do all these different roles for you in the same window. Oh, and it can generate images for you, and it can generate songs for you, and it can do all this other stuff as well. Students look at the capabilities of school and go, but you can only do one thing for 7 hours a day. Like that's whereas I've got this other interface, this other experience, which can do multiple different things very, very rapidly anytime I need. So if we don't think and rethink through what the opportunities are, and part of that is linked to teacher workload as well, because we can drastically reduce some aspects of teacher workload and replace it with training, support, and exploration of these other things we need teachers to be able to do very, very rapidly. So if we can manage to do those things, and teachers in schools are very used to doing multiple things at the same time. So we can do this. We showed it during COVID in different jurisdictions, where in New South Wales, at least, we had 8 days to get ready for our lockdowns that were happening in Sydney and beyond. So if we can change a whole bunch of things about school in 8 days for that reason, I think we can do the same now that we've had ChatGPT for almost 3 years.
Just quickly, back to the research point though, Aaryan, is that perhaps one thing we talk about in the book is that maybe the growth of generative AI will also spark the growth of constructionism and constructivism, where we're actually building things, physically doing things. So if you look at that in research, maybe this will start to make more researchers actually do the action research, actually do the on-the-ground physical experiments of things, and less of that theoretical work. I'm not saying that the theoretical work's not valuable, but if AI can produce that theoretical work, or if we look at like examples such as radiology, where there's some real in-depth work going on as regards what AI can do to support the human at a deeper level, well, then if you're collecting huge data sets and you're getting these mass amount of data in your action research or whatever sort of cycle you're going through, then AI can do the analysis for you, and then you've got a much richer set, and maybe that speeds up the whole process, and we aren't waiting 7 years for something to be published as well. And then it starts to question the whole peer review, because we've also seen recently that AI is being used in peer review experimentation as well, and being shown to be actually very, very good at being a peer reviewer. So if that process gets faster, then maybe we have more research and more depth of research, and we consider research on a different level, and maybe that starts to break down some of those barriers as to who can do research as well, and we don't have these ivory towers of going, oh, it has to be done like this, and you have to wait 7 years, and it has to be these guys who sit in a room and decide he can, she can, and all that kind of thing. It's all like anybody can publish research in different ways, but then we have a different problem, don't we, of going, well, which research is credible and which is not. But I think it opens the field, and AI is a democratizer in that way. It's a disruptor and it's a democratizer in certain ways. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a very interesting take, Nick. Coming back to this question on building capacity of teachers, one interesting point you make in the book is keeping training to a minimum. So for a teacher with, say, limited to no experience with AI, what do you think is the first best step? Should they jump into experimenting with AI tools, maybe take a course or learn through, say, communities? So what are the most practical and impactful ways you think educators can upskill themselves today, given technology is rapidly evolving? What we learned yesterday is not the same as what we might have today.
Any or all of those, Aaryan. Any or all of those. There is no right way into this. There are many things available. You do not have to pay for training. There are plenty of free things out there. You can pick up a book like we wrote. You can have a go with things. You can talk to colleagues. There will be colleagues in every single school that are doing some wild and wonderful stuff. Some of them you'll know about and some of them you don't. You can talk to students in your class who will be doing things and will show you things. This is fertile ground at the moment. People are in different places, different skill levels and different exposure. But any or all of those things, whatever you feel comfortable in, Matt and I have done, or we'll go to big events, we'll go to small events, we'll do DIY things, we'll experiment ourselves. The one thing I would say is to anybody, and I say this a lot of the time, is, the question I get asked is, how do you keep up with this? The answer is I don't. And neither does anybody else keep up with all of it. What you do is have a network of people, and then somebody else is doing it. Because if you live at this side of the world, tools come out at that side of the world, and you have to wait for them anyway. So you're never going to be the first. And that's not what this is about, actually. It's about coming to tools because they all develop so quickly and they're all in competition. It's coming to tools when you need them. So pick an interest, have a go at something, try it out. The beauty of this technology is if you just fail, you can reiterate. That's what it's all about. Just have another go. And there are communities all over the place. There's a big online community in LinkedIn. You may not be comfortable in that space, but it is a very, very rich space in terms of people using this technology and sharing ideas. And they're not just educators, which makes it quite an exciting space, even if you have to deal with 25,000 messages trying to sell you something. But, there are many different avenues into this, whether you feel comfortable in the online space, you'd rather take the courses. But as I say, you do not have to pay for anything in order to experiment with this technology.
Thank you, Nick. So my next question is more of a three-part question. So we'll break this down. So the first part of my question is, what pedagogical approaches should educators consider stopping to effectively leverage the power and potential of AI? My next question would be start and continue, but what is it that educators need to stop in terms of pedagogical approaches?
That's a really interesting one, because there may be some pedagogical approaches that simply need to adapt rather than be completely stopped. And it all depends on your context, because if there's a need to use a particular pedagogical approach, then you should absolutely do that. It's kind of like with previous generations of tech, like Nick mentioned, the sort of Web 2 series of technologies. Just because you can do something digitally doesn't mean you need to. And just because something comes along that questions how you do things doesn't necessarily mean you need to. However, I do think teachers perhaps need to stop assuming that learning only happens in the classroom and start to embrace, or maybe this is the start part, sorry, I'm jumping ahead, but to start to embrace that learning that happens outside of the traditional classroom. And because now we have the ability to track that and to recognize that more just as efficiently as things you do in class. So if it's, that scenario where a student might come into class really excited because they watched a movie over the weekend and they learned so much about a historical time period or something, but as a teacher you go, well, we haven't learnt about that yet. That's not part of our program. We'll do that later, that sort of thing. We kind of need to shift that thinking a bit and say, no, well, how might we leverage that enthusiasm, that passion, that interest, rather than say, no, you've got to wait another 5 months or 6 months for us to get to that topic. So we kind of have to stop, I think, being so rigid about, and it's easier said than done, but rigid about the pathways that students are going on, and certainly every student being on the same pathway. And also, Aaryan, there are a couple of questions in the chat that I think would be worth bringing in perhaps at this point too, because one of them is about critical thinking. Did you want to go through those?
Sure. I think we can go ahead with this question. So I don't know if I'm getting the name right. It's Fadilatu. So they have asked this question. Some people have perception that using AI limits are critical thinking or make students not to think critical. What's your take on that?
Well,
so
I already.
Sorry.
Yeah, I already brought that example up before, where if you are exposing students to using this tool within your teaching environment or within their work, then you are bringing critical thinking elements into that straight away. I would also say that this starts to veer into, because there's also a question there about making students lazy, and human beings lazy. And I think all of those start to veer into this thing of going, at what point does use of a tool become too much? At what point do you give away too much of your learning? And that's a very, very difficult question to answer. It's also heavily contextual. So it depends on what you're doing. It depends on what you're trying to assess. It depends on what students are trying to learn. But there are points where you may feel as a teacher, or even better if you can get students to understand from their learning perspective and get them to recognize when they're giving too much away. And that's what I try to do with young people. So if we work on that, back to that agency idea, and we're giving students, empowering students, if we're going to build students critical thinking, they've got to be critically thinking of themselves, because if they're critical about their own learning and their value in their own learning, they will know when they're giving too much away. They still may make mistakes, but that starts to dismiss this whole idea of plagiarism, because it takes a different tone then. It takes this idea of, I'm valuing what I learn. I know I've got to learn this stuff. This is important to me. So therefore, I'm going to use AI to this point, and then I'm not. I'm going to put it down, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. But this whole thing of, and I get asked that question a lot of the time, well, what is too much? Well, I can't answer that for you. You've got to understand that yourself as a teacher, as a learner, and those kinds of things. And it's got to be in your context and what you are trying to achieve.
And in terms of that, yeah, the laziness idea and sort of sitting back, I think there are lots and lots of students around the world every day who are sitting back, not doing much thinking, because teachers are talking and giving information and basically asking people to say, now, what did I just say? Or do a comprehension question on the information we just learned. And it's all at that sort of remembering level of thinking. I think there's too much, and this is my own practice as well. I'm not blaming others. I'm just saying, a lot of how we teach and what we teach and the experience of a classroom is students sitting and listening. And there's not a lot of critical thinking that happens when that's happening. It's just absorbing at best. And at best, when you use AI, what you can actually see is some of the most visible learning ever if students go beyond a basic prompt and response, or prompt and output. If students are having conversations with the AI, challenging the AI, saying, no, you're wrong on that point, because they've gone off and verified the information, come back to that conversation with the AI and said, I found information that says that didn't happen on that date, it happened on this date. Or, that law is wrong. You should be talking about this law. Or I'm in Australia and you're talking about UK legislation, or whatever it happens to be that the student's looking at. That's critical thinking. And I think the more students interact with these tools, they're actually able to, maybe even in the 5 minutes after listening to a teacher for half an hour, they're doing a lot of critical thinking there if they're interacting, if they're responding, if they're changing tack, if they're offering different perspectives, if they're asking the AI to take a contrary view, for example, and saying, here's what I'm going to tell you about what I think about this topic. I want you to offer contrary views or ask me questions about it. And that sort of interaction and the ability to look at that history of that conversation is actually a really powerful critical thinking process. And to the point where if students are using these tools year on year over the course of their school life, that tool will probably know them really, really well. So it's not a tool anymore, really. It isn't anyway. But by the end of their schooling, for example, that entity will be able to say, you know what, you've grown a lot in your ability to question over the last few years. And I can show you examples of the last few years that it remembers, because it's got that huge digital mind that it can reach back much, much better than humans can. And so I think there's a few elements of critical thinking that we could surface, that we could make really explicit. And when students are using these technologies in an appropriate way with supervision, and especially with tools that are approved and checked for safety and everything, so like Microsoft Copilot, if you've got an institutional account, is as safe as many of the other Microsoft products, as just one example. And so you could, after students used it, go back and say, can you just explain to me what the problems were when you were using the AI? What were the things that you were impressed by? What were the things that you were concerned or didn't agree with? That's critical thinking. And like I say, the equivalent is students sitting in a classroom, right? And listening to a teacher or listening to someone else or watching a video or whatever. And how much critical thinking is happening depends on how we use it.
Thank you, Matt. Nick, coming back to the previous question, is there something that you'd like to add on what teachers should stop or rethink, if I can use
I
that
think,
word?
I mean, Matt talked about rigidity, and I was actually thinking that themselves, but he was talking about rigidity in a certain thing. I think if you just said rigidity full stop, because everything within teaching and learning and everything within a school is actually open to question now. You know, the whole systems from timetables to structures to what we think. Somebody said the other day, it was in a piece that I was in a discussion where it was about, well, learning's still the same no matter whether AI comes on, and I was like, is it? Are the process of learning different now? You know, are the ways we can learn and the opportunities we have and time and place and context, does that change? So does that change some of the mechanics of learning? I'm not quite sure that learning is exactly the same as it's ever been. Yes, there are core foundational elements that are still the same, but some of the things I think begin to change. So therefore, that rigidity in all aspects, you have to be willing to sit in the complexity and sit in the uncomfortable space that we're in and sit with a very entrepreneurial mindset. And I think that's the biggest challenge for us. So if you're going to stop something, I think you've got to stop assuming that the things that we've always done or the ways we've operated on different levels can be maintained, because everything is open to question.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick. So again, following up on the same question, what approaches or what pedagogical approaches do you think educators should start? And then we'll end, maybe we'll end this with this question with what is it that you saw through your research that educators should continue doing, that you noticed that this was really interesting and should continue? So yes.
Yeah, I think in terms of starting, if you haven't started with your own individual use of AI, I think it's time to start. I think it's time to start experimenting. It's time to start exploring, and it can be simple things like going in and asking it, create a recipe for me based on the ingredients in my fridge. It can be create a plan for my week, knowing that I've got this and this and this. It can be taking a photo and uploading it and asking it to interpret what's in the photo. It can be setting up a professional learning plan for yourself. It could be doing some basic research for you. And in each of those activities, whichever one is of interest to you, you apply your professional lens to that and see whether it's accurate and see whether it's helpful and see whether it's useful, but then keep going with it as well and challenging it and really pushing the AI to try and achieve something for you and with you. I mean, if all you do is say, okay, I want to test students' knowledge on this particular outcome from whatever curriculum you're using, and you say, give me 10 options on how I might assess that, you'll probably find that 2 or 3 of those options are things you never would have thought of. You might have thought of 6 or 7 of them, and so you say, oh, well, I would have thought of those. But 2 or 3 of them will truly impress you, I think, as a first draft. And then, of course, you can say, great, now write me a first draft of that assessment task using these particular parameters, adding some outcomes, adding some context. So in terms of starting off with your use of AI, I think that's what people need to do. And then in terms of continuing, I think continuing to genuinely have students at the center of what we do instead of curriculum documents at the center of what we do. Because if we have students at the center of what we do, then we'll prioritize them and their lived reality over curriculum documents or other things that aren't, that we are still accountable to, but aren't actually as critically as important for our focus right now as the students' lived experience, because they are moving along, they are walking through that forest, and they're walking away from us. So we need to show them that we're at least walking with them. We might be behind them, but we're at least walking with them, and they can come back to us and rely on us because we're trusted human individuals who are accountable to them and who care about them.
Yeah, just to add to that as well is that I think there's quite a lot of teachers who probably had a bit of a play with AI to begin with, and then dismissed it because it wasn't very good. But if you haven't come back to it for a while, you may get a bit of a surprise that how good it is. So I would urge those section of people to actually come back to it, but I would come back to it with an actually idea in your head of what you want to achieve. That backwards by design is actually very important. So what do you want to achieve in your head? But then you get the next thing of going, yes, but I don't know how to prompt. You don't need to know how to prompt anymore, because all you do is go, this is my idea. Can you create me a prompt for this that's going to work? And you will put it into a chat that'll create your prompt, and then you will run that prompt. But then the next level is you have to understand this is chatting. This is a chat. That's what it is. So don't expect to explore, expect to go deeper with a chatbot. And the more you do that, the more you will become comfortable with it. So it is about that exposure, that comfort. But as Matt talked about there, aim it at something that you can put in front of students, that you can be working with students. Aim for that. Aim to be uncomfortable and to expose your own frailties with it in working, and you'll quickly find there'll be students in your class who will guide you through that process, and then it becomes a learning community, doesn't it? And isn't that what we all want in our classroom?
I think that was quite interesting. I just remembered my school days when my teacher ended up telling me, "Don't be a chatterbox," and I think
And now we're saying the
I do
opposite.
see that as a skill now. So that's quite interesting. Thank you so much for that one, Nick. So my next question to you is, in what ways do you envision AI transforming the role of teachers? I think you have spoken about this, but in the next 1 decade, right? So I did hear both of you talk about how you folks anticipated agentic stuff and it was already out there. So how do you envision the next 10 years of teachers, or the role of teachers evolving?
Yeah, I mean, Nick talked about that those other roles that teachers already have, and that those will be emphasised. I think also we have to realise that in the next 10 years we will have digital markers of work. There already are algorithms and AIs that are being deployed for testing regimes around the world already, but that'll become more contextual, as in schools will have like a digital AI marker that students will, several, that students will submit their work to and get feedback from. So it won't just be from a human anymore. Teachers will be teaching alongside digital teachers, AI teachers, that are employed by the school or designed by the school and hosted at the school, so that it's got the values and the context of the school embedded within it. I think there'll be AI managers and AI administration people all throughout, like, you know, the future of IT people and business managers and administrative staff and marketing staff and all sorts of things are now being explored, shall we say, with different AI tools, because one person well trained in these tools can do all sorts of different roles all at once. There will be AI teachers, there'll be AI principals. There already is one. I believe there's a UK principal who copied himself, essentially, uploaded all of his speeches and articles that he's written and everything, and created a digital version of himself that people can interact with. There's already AI board members of some companies. There's an AI CEO of a Dutch company. So I think that will be the future, is that we'll see more AI entities being part of staff, being part of school communities and they're sort of contained or controlled by that school or system to some degree, but they will be able to provide services well beyond what human capability is. So you'll have one AI for a particular state or country or something, where students can interact with that AI as a person, like as well as they could a person, calling it on the phone, speaking with it, having Zoom calls with it. And you can have hundreds of thousands of students doing that all at once with the same technology. And that, I think that'll be part of the future.
Yeah, I've actually just been at a conference today, which is actually a tech conference, not just education, business as well. And, you know, all the big hitters were there, as you'd expect. And it's quite clear to me that when you look on that bigger scale, that if you look at all the professional services operations that happen within any institution, education or otherwise, there's so much of that that's ripe for automation, whether that be on a local level, on a larger scale, everything from the marketing to the person who answers the phone on the desk and everything like that. So if you consider all that administration that happens within a school or a university or whatever institution you're looking at, a lot of that is going to be automated. A lot of that's going to be controlled by AI or heavily influenced by AI. So if that starts to happen, then some of the things we talk about in the book is that administrative burden. Surely it's got to be eased on teachers. You know, you're going to be able to have some of that taken away, and some of that done for you. So I think that'll happen. And then on another level, you'll have students, as we've already talked about today, with their AI assistants, with that thing that knows them and it's coaching them through their life. They may bring it with them, or it may be something that's localized with their school, or maybe a bit of both. Maybe they'll have a number of different agents that take on different roles. So if we have these things coming in, we're going to see AI interspersed in so many different levels. And the one thing I will say is that the way we're using AI tools at the moment is sort of like we have to go to them. If you're exposed to AI that's happening within environments, even just going to Canva and putting a presentation together, AI is within it. So you're already seeing this now. It's finishing your emails off. It's, you know, if you've got M365 in Microsoft, then it's all over your SharePoint or whatever. It's within the suite, and that's how it's going to be. You know, people can talk about, well, I'm open source and I believe in this, and that's great. But ultimately, these huge tech companies are going to offer solutions which most institutions are going to take up because they're already bought into their environments. It's already got the security layers. They've already invested in there. So these will ultimately, it's horrible to say, but they will prevail in a lot of instances. And so the technology will be in, and you won't even realize when you're using AI. And like people don't now, they just got on watching Netflix. You do realize it's got AI in it, don't you? You do Spotify. Well, you do realize that playlist has been put together with AI. Oh, has it? Yes. You know, so it's this thing, and it will just. So maybe we won't be talking about AI at all. We'll just accept that this is what technology is because there'll be so many layers to it.
Thank you, Nick. So now we'll take a few audience questions before I ask you the final word. So first question, since we have come to terms that AI is there to reshape education entirely, what are some of the ways that we can get prepared for this inevitable revolution from a personal level as learners rather than enforcers of education? And how can we deal with some of the emerging problems with AI, such as information bias?
I think you've just got to read our book. That's the first place to start. I'll let Matt answer this one. That's a tough question.
It's tough, but it's also something that librarians, people who work in the information literacy space, have been talking about for a long, long, long time. You know, whenever I chat to someone who works in a library or school library or otherwise, they'll say, you know, welcome to the party. We've been talking about this for over 20 years. As soon as Google came out, not just the internet, but Google in particular, they've been talking about the accuracy of information, bias within information. And of course, there's been a conversation before that too, but much, much more prevalent when Google came along. So they kind of say, yeah, we have actually been talking about this for quite some time. So it's actually leveraging that thinking that's already there, the research that's been done into that, the guidelines and frameworks that are already there for students to start to interrogate information, because I think that's probably where more attention will need to be paid, is rather than the collection of information and the synthesis of information, it's actually going to be the interrogation of it. So the human, the student, is provided with the information, is provided almost with an entire task, and their job is to almost reverse engineer it and go back and check that everything's correct. And that is a critical thinking process. That's a research process. It's a deductive process. And so I think that's probably where that will go, and dealing with really it's about partly as well having just that open channel of conversation with students, to saying, I'm willing to listen to you and not get you in trouble if you tell me things about how you use AI. because I want to listen, I want to learn, and I want to see where you're up to. Example, I was at a school the other day, a couple of weeks ago, and I was asking students in particular how they use AI, and they just went around this circle, and one of them mentioned that they use Snapchat AI to do their maths homework. And I just sat back and went, sorry, you use Snapchat AI. So forget ChatGPT, forget Microsoft Copilot, forget all these things grown-ups are using because we're told to. And I said, I looked around the room and I said, how many of you are using Snapchat? And they all looked at me like I was from another planet because it was such an obvious thing to them. And they said the reason is because that's where they all are. So they see a sort of a social connectivist lens to it as well, to say, but that's where my friends are. Why would I go to ChatGPT? In ChatGPT, I only talk to this. They still go to ChatGPT. But in Snapchat, they can not only use the AI that's in it to answer questions and to take photos of their work and to be able to process that way, but they can share it straight away, much, much more easily. So I think that open channel is something we have to have in terms of conversing with our students about where they are doing this, how they are doing it, and why they're doing it. Because some will be quite open and say, I just get it to do my homework because the homework's boring. How will we deal with that? Well, that's up to us. And guess what? We're the adults in the room. So we don't just react to things, right? We respond to things. We've got to think about it. We've got to work out whether it's prevalent, whether it's isolated, and how we can actually guide our students through that process.
Thank you,
Yeah, and
Matt.
just to add on to that is like, you know, like that exposure piece needs to go to communities, it needs to go to parents, it needs to go in the environments you're working. You need to be clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it, and we're willing to be challenged regarding that. But I will say that more and more parents that I talk to now, they're getting exposure themselves within their workplaces. So you can learn from them if it's an open dialogue that involves the students, involves the community, involves the parents, and involves the industry. We're all struggling through figuring this thing out. And the events that myself and Matt have been in quite recently have showed us that is that it's not just educators that are struggling with this. There's lots of different areas. We would all be in an environment with autonomous vehicles right now if it wasn't for the legality and the infrastructure. You know, so it's the same issues in a lot of different cases that are holding things back, that are things that we're struggling with.
Thank you. Thank you for that one, Nick. So the next question is, will AI do away traditional learning in classroom settings? If this is a possibility, what happens to those learning styles that require group work and class participation? So
Yeah, that's fascinating.
I think that goes back to what we talked about. I believe it's more about constructionism. It's more about constructivism. AI is not going to be able to go out and climb trees. It's not going to be able to go down to the creek or the river and look for frog spawn or whatever you're doing, or look for bacteria in the water and bring it back. It's not going to be able to do those things. It shouldn't be there replacing a physical experiment. It shouldn't be denying young people the chance to experience things, to take risks, to look at like themselves and go, oh, okay, then should I have done that? Should I not have done that? Should I have made that mistake? And the chance to make those mistakes, which is how we learn when we're young. However, I've even said all these things, I have got to be open myself in those beliefs that I can't be rigid in that. Perhaps it will disrupt some of those things, but I think we have to hold on to what we value, and hopefully it will involve more of us doing those things which actually get our hands dirty and get us learning by doing, which to me is such a rich experience and so much of what we should be doing with young people.
Thank you, Nick. So the next question is, learning anywhere that you spoke about anytime. Learning anywhere, anytime is intimidating for teachers as you're not in control. You can't monitor. How can teachers get over this feeling of not being in control? So this is the question
that's a hard one, isn't it? Because every fiber in your being tells you that you are in control because you're the accountable one, because you've got several layers of authorities who will, in theory, punish you if something goes wrong, right? And one of those things is that students are out of control. But yeah, I mean, we're living in that that space where students do have control over this, and it's both a wonderful and a horrifying thing, right? Is that students have access to vast information, and now they've got access to multiple assistants who can help them grapple with that, who can teach them certain things. It might not be the right thing. It can teach them in certain ways. They might not be the right ways. But in the end, yeah, schools are and curriculums are pretty rigid. There are clear outcomes because there needs to be clear structure for a curriculum to work. But even for external exams. So in my jurisdiction, we have very, very heavy external examinations at the end of school called the high school certificate examinations, and they perform usually like a 50% role of students' final marks when they leave school. Now, students are already using AI to train them to get ready for those exams, especially if they can't afford a tutor, and a tutor's basically training them for the exam. And there's studies that show that students forget most of what they've put into that exam. They might have performed really, really well, and then you ask them a couple of months later, and they can't remember much of what they did, even though they've been studying it apparently for 2 years. And that's because they're studying it for one very, very narrow purpose. And what AI does, it comes along and says, what if the exam was in 30 years? Or never? That's the world we're living in now, is that you can put as many tests as you like on students. You can check their knowledge very, as often as you like. But it also challenges you to think very, very differently about the why. Why would students do that? So I think it does challenge the traditional classroom setting in a way, but I think there's some safety and security in that too. I mean, I think the assumptions that will hold true is that young people still want someone to know them and to work in a group of some sort, to be coached, to be guided, to have that sort of cognitive apprenticeship of someone who has more life experience to guide you along. And that will probably, whilst ever parents still have to work and need students to go somewhere during the day, I think schools will survive in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, it will be quite different. But I think what the school day looks like will be quite different, and the school week and the school term and semester will look quite different. Because if we're saying, what if we could shrink that time students are sitting and listening to 2 hours instead of 7? What if they'd get the same outcomes? What if they could perform in the same way, show you their knowledge in the same way by just using 2 hours a day instead of 7? What would you do with the other 5 hours? Would you go down to the creek, like Nick says? Would you sit under a tree and read poetry? Would you learn to play another musical instrument? Could students learn another language? All of those things make your mind better, make your brain better. So why wouldn't we do those things in that time and allow students to explore those things that they are strong in, build on their strengths, and also challenge those areas where they feel less strong or weak?
So I think, Aaryan, like what we're talking about there is, this is a beautiful opportunity for mankind to actually have those open conversations with young people, which we have increasingly been doing, but this is accelerating it, is that the value of learning, the love of learning. People talk about the love of learning. Come on, let's be honest. Most undergraduates on a degree are not there for the love of learning, are they? They're there to get the degree. They're there, so we're talking about schools here, and it's been the same of that average year 9 student in maths on a Friday afternoon. They're not there for the love of learning. They're there because they have to be there. Now, an undergraduate is probably there because they choose to be there, but they're there to get the prize at the end. So if we're focusing more, this is our opportunity to focus on the love of learning, to focus on that passion, and to get young people to understand the value of learning. And I think that's happening more and more. It's certainly happening in my environment, because you can no longer kid people anymore. They know that there are 1,000,001 opportunities. They don't have to go to university. They don't have to go through that pathway that you've defined for them, or their parents have defined. So more and more we're getting this, as I talked about before, democratization, disruption, whichever way you look at it. But if you take a positivist stance, this is an opportunity to really go gung-ho in that respect, and to have students choose their own pathways, and then we lead into that, because we have the technology to facilitate that to happen that we've never had before, to make those things faster and easier, and be able to provide content or the pathways through that. So I think, if we look at it, if we're going to come out of this long talk tonight in all those things, is If you have the positivist stance and you appreciate there are fears, but you look at this in through those rose tinted spectacles or slightly rose tinted, then we've got opportunities here which we've never had before to realize dreams and to realize what we should have been doing for a long time with the generations that are coming through.
I think we have, thank you so much for that response, Nick. I think we have last question from the audience. What about educating parents on how to diligently deal with their kids' AI usage? What's your take on this? And then maybe I have a couple of questions and we would wrap up the discussion.
If you're a parent now of a young person that's in a school, I would be asking those questions of that school. I'd want to know what they are doing about AI. I'd want to know what their stance is. I want to know what their take is. If you are working in education at the moment, then you need to be working in a place that has a clear stance about AI. You need to understand what they're doing as regards professional development, what they're doing as regards working with students, what their take is on AI, what is their plan going forward. And that plan doesn't have to be 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. It just has to be for this year. You know, what's the current plan? What is the thing going forward? How do they envisage that they're going to guide young people through this journey? And I think that comment that I've just made there, if they don't have a take on that and they don't even have a view of that, they've not even thought of that, and perhaps you're working in the wrong place. Seriously, because or maybe if you believe that, maybe you're working in the right place. And there will be schools that will exist. You know, there are schools now that just believe in nature play and non-tech and those niche places will exist. But realistically, you need to be thinking about, as a parent, well, what is happening to the person that's in front of me? How am I supposed to guide them? What education do I need? Can I go to the school and ask them what their stance is? Are they going to provide sessions for me or information which can help me? What's happening in this community? Because schools are no longer can say that's not our problem. It is. Schools are part of the community, as they always have been, but now even more so. You know, a child's well-being, a child's education doesn't just stop at the school gates. It happens. They bring things with them. They take it home. Mobile technology facilitates that. So I think this open dialogue needs to happen. And I'd be fine as a parent to have that conversation. I don't need to have that conversation with schools that my kids go to because I can facilitate that part of the education for them. But that you need to be questioning as a parent, and as an educator, you also need to be questioning what stance do we have in our leadership? What is our take on this? What do we believe in?
And I said much earlier as well that schools need to take that position, that policy level people have to take a position and systems need to take a position, but it has to be aligned. And that includes parents as well. So that what we're saying to students is being said to parents, is being said to staff, so that, like Nick says, for the next 6 months, the next 9 months, whatever we're going to commit to, not long term, this is our stance for now. This is why, and this is how it's going to work. And you can do that reasonably. And most parents, I think, will be on board with that, to have consistent information coming out so that when they see a student come home with some work to do, they can respond in an appropriate way that aligns with what the school's expectations are. And that comes with schools engaging parents as well, offering them webinars, offering them information sessions, which you can pair with other things. But yeah, making sure that the information parents get. I mean, the irony is that, well, it's not irony, I suppose, but AI can help with a lot of this too, right? AI can help you generate information for parents. It can help you generate questions for a survey. It can help you analyze the information that you get from a survey. It can help you generate information based on that analysis for students and staff and parents so that it is consistent. So the effort involved in that is significantly reduced as well. So there's really no excuse for schools that have the technology, and by that I mean basically a smartphone or an internet-connected laptop. If you have those things with for half an hour, then you could probably get most of that engagement work done to be able to at least take your stance on firmer ground.
Thank you, Matt and Nick. So my next question to you is on the book, The Next Word. So why did you choose the title of the book as The Next Word? And what was the decision behind, like, choosing that word or choosing that title? Sorry.
Well, at the time, a lot of the way you'd sort of explain to people how AI works is that basically it's a machine that predicts the next statistically probable word in a sentence, and it would just do that again and again and again, and that's what you see pop up in ChatGPT or other tools. So there was kind of a technological angle to it, but also we did want to provide the next word in this conversation, the next ideas, the next arguments, the next responses, because neither of us are AI experts, really. We don't have PhDs in AI. And so, we didn't want to be seen to be the final word in the conversation, but we did want to be the next word. And I think it helps because it allows us to be more responsive to the changes that come along as well.
Thank you. So I think you've made it clear the next word. So my last question coming to this, if you had to predict the next big shifts in AI and education, what would that be? And how do you think this would manifest?
Well, the next shift is going to be our next book, which is about actually AI and learners. So that's where we're going to actually focus on what students' perspectives are. Matt's already touched on the confusing state that we're in at the moment, where we don't really know what students are doing or what we're thinking. I can tell you that there's in the Southern Hemisphere, coming back for the new school year after Christmas, has seen a not a complete change, but a dramatic change in a lot of respects, in more students using, some students on paid models in high school environments. So more students being open about their use, but perhaps that's the environment I work in. But I definitely think we've got increased use, and statistics in research around the world shows that. So what we need to focus on is understanding, as Matt talked about before, is understanding how and what learners are doing, and that's why we're going to focus the next book in trying to get those perspectives from around the world, in students that fear AI, students that are confused by AI, and students that are excited by AI. So I think the more we embrace that and the more we understand that, the more we can not dictate and have this top-down approach and remove our own rigidity and try to remove some of our biases.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between the near future and the distant future as well. In the next 6 months, I can see more and more schools building up their capabilities, awareness, and literacies around these technologies, and doing so more rapidly and more extensively and with more sophistication, finding more opportunities to utilize this to make their life and their organization more streamlined and effective, not necessarily to get rid of humans in the mix, but actually to allow those people who are there to do more work. So that's what a lot of smaller organizations are finding, in particular, say startups, are able to do the business side of things, the marketing side of things, the communication side of things, and run the business as well, because they have access to these tools that can help them do it. They still eventually might hire people to do those roles because they want something else, but that'll be true in education as well, as we can provide more services with the same level of resources. And I guess the distant future is, kind of weird and different and interesting, because we genuinely don't know what schools will look like. They may look quite similar, but instead of, just having one human adult with a group of 30-ish students, say, there will probably be at least one or two, maybe many different digital entities that teacher is deploying in that space as well, to answer questions and to support students. And the students will be bringing these digital, someone called it spirit animals, digital assistants of all sorts, with their devices in their pockets or in their hands. And so it will be this multi-way interaction. It'll be like an individual student is in a social environment with other human beings, but they'll be supported by this army of friendly assistants who are just there waiting to be called upon to be able to help for your specific trigonometry homework, or your specific, space exploration in science, or your analysis of a particular poem in English, or something like that. And each one will be specifically tailored to those students, not to do the work for them, but to help them think through the scenario, in the best case, of course, so that students feel like they just have this amazing digital world wrapped around them that they can personalize to their heart's content.
Thank you so much, Matt and Nick. So we are towards the end of this fireside discussion. So I would like to formally conclude the vote of thanks and remarks. So as we conclude this insightful and engaging conversation, I would like to extend a heartfelt gratitude to both of you, Dr. Nicholas Jackson and Matthew Esterman, for your invaluable insights, contributions, and generosity on behalf of the Global Citizenship Foundation, the Council for Global Citizenship Education, and all our attendees. And I would also like to thank our partners, our supporters, the Horsey AI team, for supporting this initiative, and to all our members and guests, attendees, you are our reason for being. So thank you for being with us. Thank you so much for being part of this dialogue and letting us support you in this journey of growth and impact and learning. So we really, really appreciate the time, insights, and efforts that all of you have contributed to driving this extremely crucial discussion towards shaping the many futures of education for generations of educators and young people. See you soon. Until then, take care, stay safe, and spread love and compassion. Our world needs it more. Thank you, everybody. And thank you once again, both.